Chapter 3. Robert Langdon was busy reviewing his note cards when the hum of the town car's tires changed pitched on the road beneath him. Langdon glanced up, surprised to see where they were. Memorial Bridge already? He put down his notes and gazed out at the calm waters of the Potomac passing beneath him. A heavy mist hovered on the surface. Aptly named Foggy Bottom had always seemed a peculiar site on which to build the nation's capital. Of all the places in the New World, the forefathers had chosen a soggy riverside marsh on which to lay the cornerstone of their utopian society. Langdon glanced right across the tidal basin towards the gracefully rounded silhouette of the Jefferson Memorial, America's Panthelon, as many called it. Directly in front of the car, the Lincoln Memorial rose with rigid austerity, its orthogonal orthogonal lines reminiscent of Athens' ancient Parthenon. But it was farther away that Langdon saw the city's centerpiece, the same spire he had seen from the air. Its architectural inspiration was far, far older than the Romans or the Greeks. America's Egyptian obelisk. The monolithic spire of Washington Monument loomed ahead, illuminated against the sky like the majestic mast of a ship. From Langdon's oblique angle, the obelisk appeared ungrounded tonight, swaying against the dreary sky as if on an unsteady sea. Langdon felt similarly ungrounded. His visit to Washington had been utterly unexpected. I woke up this morning anticipating a quiet Sunday at home, and now I'm a few minutes away from the U.S. Capitol. The morning at 4:45, or this morning at 4:45, Langdon had plunged into deep calm water, beginning his day as he always did, swimming 50 laps in the deserted Harvard pool. His physique was not quite what it had been in his college days as a water polo All-American, but he was still lean and toned, respectable for a man in his 40s. The only difference now was the amount of effort it took Langdon to keep it that way. When Langdon arrived home around 6, he began his morning ritual of hand grinding Sumatra coffee beans and savoring the exotic scent that filled his kitchen. This morning, however, he was surprised to see the blinking red light on his voicemail display. Who calls at 6 a.m. on Sunday? He pressed the button and listened to the message. Good morning, Professor Langdon. I'm terribly sorry for this early morning call. The polite voice was noticeably hesitant, with a hint of a southern accent. My name is Anthony Gelbart. I am Peter Solomon's executive assistant. Mr. Solomon told me you're an early riser. He had been trying to reach you this morning on short notice. As soon as you receive this message, would you be so kind to call Peter directly? You probably have his new private line, but if not, it's 202-329-5746. Langdon felt a sudden concern for his old friend. Peter Solomon was impeccably well-bred and courteous, and certainly not the kind of man to call at daybreak on a Sunday unless something was very wrong. Langdon left his coffee half made and hurried towards his study to return the call. I hope he's okay. Peter Solomon had been a friend, mentor, and although only 12 years Langdon's senior, a father figure to him ever since their first meeting at Princeton University. As a sophomore, Langdon had been required to attend an evening guest lecture by the well-known young historian and philanthropist. Uh, Solomon had spoken with courageous passion, presenting a dazzling vision of semiotics and archetypal history that had sparked in Langdon what would later become his lifelong passion for symbols. It was not Peter Solomon's brilliance, however, but the humility in his gentle grey eyes that had given Langdon the courage to write him a thank you letter. The young sophomore had never dreamed that Peter Solomon, one of America's wealthiest and most intriguing young intellectuals, would ever write back, but Solomon did, and it had been the beginning of a truly gratifying friendship. A prominent academic whose quiet manner belied his powerful heritage, Peter Solomon came from the ultra-wealthy Solomon family, whose names appeared on buildings and universities all over the nation. Like the Rothschilds in Europe, the name Solomon had always carried the mystique of American royalty and success. Peter had inherited the mantle at a young age after the death of his father, and now at 58 he had held numerous positions of power in his life. He currently served as the head of the Smithsonian Institution. Langdon occasionally ribbed Peter that the lone tarnish on his sterling pedigree was his diploma from a second-rate university, Yale. Now, as Langdon entered his study, he was surprised to see that he had received a fax from Peter as well. Good morning, Peter. I need to speak with you at once. Please call me this morning as soon as you can at 202-329-5746. Peter. Langdon immediately dialed the number, sitting down at his hand-carved oak desk to wait as the call went through. Office of Peter Solomon, the familiar voice of the assistant answered. This is Anthony. May I help you? Hello, this is Peter Langdon. You left a message earlier. Yes, Professor Langdon. The young man sounded relieved. Thank you for calling back so quickly. Mr. Solomon is eager to speak to you. Let me tell him you're on the line. May I put you on hold? Of course. As Langdon waited for Solomon to get on the line, he gazed down at Peter's name atop the Smithsonian letterhead and had to smile. Not many slackers in the Solomon clan. Peter's ancestral tree burgeoned with the names of wealthy business magnates, influential politicians, and a number of distinguished scientists, some even fellows of London's Royal Society. Solomon's only living family member, his young sister Ch.3, had apparently inherited the science gene because she was now a leading figure in the new cutting-edge discipline called noetic science. All Greek to me, Langdon thought, amused to call Catherine's unsuccessful attempt to explain noetic science to him at a party at her brother's home last year. Langdon had listened carefully and then replied, Sounds more like magic than science. Catherine winked playfully. They're closer than you think, Robert. Now Solomon's assistant returned the phone. I'm sorry, Mr. Solomon is trying to get off a conference call. Things are a little chaotic here this morning. That's not a problem. I can easily call back. Actually, he asked me to fill you in on his reason for contacting you, if you don't mind. Of course not. The assistant inhaled deeply. As you probably know, Professor, every year here in Washington, the board of the Smithsonian hosts a private gala to thank our most generous supporters. Many of the country's cultural elites attend. Langdon knew his own bank account had too few zeros to qualify him as culturally elite, but he wondered if maybe Solomon was going to invite him to attend nonetheless. This year, as is customary, the assistant continued, the dinner will be prepared by a keynote address. The dinner will be preceded by a keynote address. We've been lucky enough to secure the National Sanctuary Hall for that speech, the best room in all of DC, Langdon thought, recalling a political lecture he had once attended in the dramatic semicircular hall. It was hard to forget 500 folding chairs splayed in a perfect arc, surrounded by 38 life-sized statues in a room that had once served as the nation's original House of Representatives chamber. The problem is this, the man said. Our speaker has fallen ill and has just informed us she will be unable to give the address. He paused awkwardly. This means we are desperate for a replacement speaker, and Mr. Solomon is hoping you would consider filling in. Langdon did a double take. Me? This was not at all what he had expected. I'm sure Peter could find a far better substitute. You're Mr. Solomon's first choice, Professor, and you're being much too modest. The institution's guests would be thrilled to hear from you, and Mr. Solomon thought you could give the same lecture you gave on Bookspan TV a few years back. That way, you wouldn't have to prepare a thing. He said your talk involved symbolism in the architecture of our nation's capital. It sounded absolutely perfect for the venue. It sounds absolutely perfect for the venue. Langdon was not so sure. If I recall, that lecture had more to do with the Masonic history of the building than... Exactly. As you know... I'm busy... Exactly. As you know, Mr. Solomon is a Mason, as there are many of his professional friends who will be in attendance. I'm sure they would love to hear you speak on the topic. I admit it would be easy. Langdon had kept the notes from every talk he had ever given. I suppose I could consider it. What date is the event? The assistant cleared his throat, sounding suddenly uncomfortable. Well, actually, sir, it's tonight. Langdon laughed out loud. Tonight? That's why it's so hectic here this morning. The Smithsonian is in a deeply embarrassing predicament. The assistant spoke more hurriedly now. Mr. Mr. Solomon is ready to send a private jet to Boston for you. The flight is only an hour, and you would be back home before midnight. You're familiar with the private air terminal at Boston's Logan Airport? I am, Langdon admitted reluctantly. No wonder Peter always gets his way. Wonderful. Would you be willing to meet the jet there at, say, 5 o'clock? You haven't left me much choice, have you? Langdon chuckled. I just want to make sure Mr. Solomon is... I just want to make Mr. Solomon happy, sir. Peter has that effect on people. Langdon considered it a long moment, seeing no way out. All right, tell him I can do it. Outstanding! The assistant exclaimed, sounding deeply relieved. He gave Langdon the jet's tail number and various other information. When Langdon finally hung up, he wondered if Solomon had ever been told no. Returning to his coffee preparation, Langdon scooped some additional beans into the grinder. A little extra caffeine this morning, he thought. It's going to be a long day.